Good morning. What's up? Happy Tuesday. It is Jason Sukamel Day. Jason doesn't care if he's wearing Adidas and Nike. That's what grown folks do, right? He is an open market here. And Jason, today we're going to talk about a thing I really have been hammering on this last week, and then I really am hammering on it today. I'm talking about how Texas, to me, is the new Alabama. And I want to explain why I think that Texas is the new Alabama. I have the proof to show that Texas is the new Alabama. So you guys make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. And I'm also going to have some Sark audio from yesterday that we can play because I think that's going to be really fun and a part of the conversation. So Jason, I'll set it up like this. And it's really interesting as we start talking about, this year's team and everything that's there. What's been fascinating to me, Jason, is that, look, you're a recruiting guy. So this goes right into your wheelhouse. Texas signed a multitude of five-star players. Now, look, it's always interesting, right, Jason, because On3 may have one as someone, 7 may have someone as a 5 or a 4. So let's just say they were 5-star somewhere, right? And at the end of the day, it's interesting to me, Jason, when I look at this year's team, it's not like we're looking at these guys, Jason, and saying those guys are going to get on the field and have an immediate impact for the team. It doesn't mean they won't be good down the line, but we're not looking at that way. And I'll just say, and I'll throw it to you, Jason, it hasn't always been that way at Texas. And we can get into the weeds in a second, but it hasn't always been that way here.
Yeah, two things. First off, Anwar, slow down, my famous slow down. Texas ain't Alabama just yet, dude. They got to win a championship before you can say they're like Alabama in their heydays, right? Maybe after this year we'll be saying that. But to your point, though, not only are these 5 stars not being forced to come in and like have, hey, day one early impact, dude, they may not have much of an impact this whole year. It may be maybe their sophomore year as a redshirt freshman, if it is as it is. So it's a little bit different, not little. It's a lot different now. You referenced in your note on Orange Bloods, like when Malik Murphy was brought in, dude. I looked. That was way back in like
Malik. No, not Malik Murphy.
Or Malik Jefferson. Malik Jefferson. 2000. I think it was 14 or 15. I was like, man, it's been that long. So, but you pretty much had to play him at Texas. He was such a high-profile recruit. You didn't have the depth. You couldn't afford to bring him along slowly. Malik Murphy's still on my mind, by the
way, because he was your guy. And that's why you're like Malik Murphy. For any Malik will always be.
Yeah, exactly. Always be Malik Murphy for me. But now Texas has this luxury of a Justice Terry, Jonah Williams, of course, who his situation is a little different with baseball, and Khalik Lockett, and you can bring these dudes along slowly. You don't have to force them out there maybe before they're ready. And I want to say it's the detriment to your team because Malik Jefferson wasn't forced out there to the detriment of the team because he was probably the best player Texas had. But now you have experienced quality players in front of these dudes. You can bring them along slowly. And I'm not talking like, we saw Colin Simmons brought along slowly to some degree, right? Week one, he wasn't, all right, Colin, go out there and get you 55, 60 snaps. It was slowly, and then it progressed as the year went on. Ant Hill was the same way. But some of these guys might be brought along slowly where they're going to be backups maybe all year, maybe even going into their sophomore year. But that's where Texas is at. This roster is stacked. I mean, Sark said it at his press conference on Saturday. You were there. I think he said he had 16 starters on defense, he feels like. So, it's a tremendous problem to have. It's a sign of an incredibly healthy program. You mentioned Alabama in the heydays, but this is what Georgia does. Alabama's still doing it. Ohio State, they recruit at an ultra high level. And some of those dudes will play early, of course, if there's a need or if they're that good and that ready. Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State last year. But some of them, you might not hear from them for a year and a half, even 2 years. And then they burst on the scene. Like, I remember that dude. He was a 5-star recruit. And then he plays a year or two, and then he's a first-round draft pick. So that's kind of where Texas is at.
Yeah, all right. Let me see if I can put this on the screen real quick, Jason, and let's see if we can talk about him. Okay. So here's the 2025 five stars that are on this year's team, right? We got Jonah Williams, Justice Terry, Kalik Lockett, Cade Phillips, and Lance Jackson. Again, all different, recruiting services have them as five stars, right? So everyone's a little bit different there. I mean, what these guys were, how major were they, Jason, coming out? And was when they were being recruited, was the expectation that these guys were going to come in and contribute from day one? Because Justice Terry, I think, got here in January, and Lance Jackson, I know, was participating in practice, right? I think Jonah Williams was probably the only late addition, but give us kind of the background on some of these guys.
Yeah, all those guys were January enrollees. Jonah was just late to the football side of things, right? Because he was playing baseball, but he was an early enrollee. So, when they were recruited and they were signed, and I'm pulling this off of your column. So it was Jonah Williams, Justice Terry, Kalik Lockett, Cade Phillips, and Lance Jackson. I think there were expectations, and that's just what we do with five-star guys. Yeah. There were expectations that all five of those dudes would play a lot and maybe even be starters, right?
Yes.
And now we're roughly a week and a half, a little more than a week and a half from the season opener. And I won't say we haven't heard buzz about some of these guys. I mean, we heard Kalik Lockett made a play in the scrimmage. We've heard a little bit of Lance Jackson buzz. Leigh Allen Clark said at the media days, hey, he is going to play as a true freshman. A little bit of Cade Phillips talks, but not much from Justice Terry, not much from Jonah. And Jonah's he was injured to start camp. But I would think it's safe to say and accurate, and this isn't me this isn't me belittling these guys at all, but I don't think any of them have met the maybe unrealistic expectations of what people had of these guys when they signed, simply because they were five-star players, simply because they were elite level recruits. And that's not because they're not good players. That's because they're going to a program that has great players in front of them. You put those dudes on Baylor or SMU, who was in the college football playoff last year, most of them are probably starting, right? They're running in the two deep for sure right now. But at Texas, it's heavy competition. There's a lot of depth. Most of those dudes are defensive players, where Texas clearly has a ton of depth. I mean, listen, you don't go out and Texas won Justice Terry recruitment for a couple of reasons. A, they did a good job, building relationship, building trust. You have to do that. But let's be honest, Omar, that was a big NIL win. Okay. You don't make that kind of NIL investment for a guy that you think, okay, he might not help us much for a year and a half. So I wouldn't say that they're behind. They're in development wise, but I mean, Texas is just loaded all of a sudden on the interior of the defensive line. So to me, it's more a testament to the talent that's on this roster, particularly on defense, than it is that these guys are being brought, maybe they're a bit behind where we expected them to. I think it's just more about the talent around them and in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, now let me see how quickly can I pull this one off. This one's going to be a little bit harder for me. Let me see. So, but there are. Let's talk about last year, right? And I'm going to try to see if I can do this thing quickly. So last year, Texas had Colin Simmons, Ryan Wingo, Kobe Black. ESPN had him ranked as a 5-star, and Brandon Baker. Of that group, Jason, Colin Simmons was the guy that contributed the most. Ryan Wingo had one big game early in the year, and then that was kind of the end of it. And then, Brandon Baker was basically a backup last year. Kobe,
Kobe Black.
Black. He did appear in every game. I think he had some special teams things as well.
There's one game he went in. Was it for Manny Muhammad? They went right after him. Remember that? And
yes, exactly.
Kobe had his freshman moments. Yeah, right. So.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, Jason, those guys were kind of like the same thing. It's like, we're not rushing you into this thing. Like, you can take your time. Let's talk a little bit about those guys in 2024 and what you remember from those guys too, Jason.
Yeah, and Wingo he was shot out of a cannon. Like that Michigan game I think he had a reverse, right? He almost took it to the house, but
Yes.
we had to steam right at the goal line. But Wingo, we had heard like had been tearing it up in fall camp and everything, so it wasn't surprising to see him get early action. But you're right, he started off like he was on fire, and then he kind of slowed down a little bit as the season went on. He still made plays here and there, but dipped a little bit. Colin Simmons was the one that I think everybody knew, all right, that dude's going to play as a true freshman. He's going to play a lot, and he's going to be really good. I mean, this was a guy, he was a 5-star, I think consensus across the board. Rivals at one time had him as the number 1 player in the country. I think they ended up finishing like 4th or something in the country. But, due to need and just his explosiveness, and he's just such a unique talent, man, his quickness off that edge. So you knew he was going to play. Wingo, we had a pretty good idea just because he's such a big, physically developed receiver. Baker, 5-star talent, but I think he was brought along a little slower than people imagine. Like you said, his backup player. Brandon Baker, remember, he was a 5-star, but he actually played right tackle on his own high school team. So it wasn't like he was the stud of the stud on his own team. And then Kobe Black was a really good player, got some situational play here and there. But, what I remember is all those were hotly contested recruitments. I mean, they could have picked anywhere in the country. But again, I mean, they're going to bring these guys along slowly. I actually, when you told me this morning we were going to talk about this, I kind of went back and looked at the 5-stars from literally like the last 6 or 7 years. And it's amazing. Anthony Hill was brought along kind of slowly, but he played a lot as a true freshman.
Yes.
CJ Baxter, and I'm going back to 2023 here, by the way. And I'm only using 24/7's rankings, so that's just what I had in front of me. CJ Baxter was a 5-star. We know he was thrown in as a true freshman.
Yes.
Arch Manning clearly brought along slowly. Jonte Cook was a 5-star in a lot of rankings. Brought along pretty slowly. Then you get back to like 2022.
By the way, but go ahead.
Exactly. But then you go to 2022, and this is kind of when this roster was not what it is now. Okay. Kelvin Banks, not brought along slowly. DJ Campbell, not brought along slowly, right? You had to force those dudes in. 2021, Jatavian Sanders, not brought along slowly. A little bit, but not to some degree. Xavier Worthy was a borderline 5-star, not brought along slowly, right? Bijan Robinson, not brought along slowly. So you're seeing a much different pattern. Bijan was 2020, by the way.
And by the way, even though he was a transfer, you could throw Quinn Ewers into that mix as well, even though as a transfer player.
Yeah, the one I would say Alfred Collins in 2020 was a 5-star on 24/7. I don't think he was on other services. But anyways, my point is you can kind of see
Alfred a while to get to where he was.
Exactly. He was brought along slowly, but I don't think he was a consensus 5-star either. But you see what I'm getting at when you go back to 2020 and 21 and even beyond that, in the 20-teens, these dudes weren't brought along slowly. They didn't have that luxury. Texas didn't have that depth. Now they do. If a guy, listen, you don't want your 5-stars to have to sit. You want your 5-star players to come in and be instant contributors. That's the goal. That's the dream. But if it doesn't happen, it's not a deal breaker, and it doesn't mean they're not really good players. It just means you've got a lot of good talent in front of them, and that's what Texas has.
Sark talked about this. I asked him about this, Jason. Let's hear what Sark said yesterday, and then let's see. Let's kind of break it down, and we can maybe give your thoughts and my thoughts on everything that Sark said. So let me see if I can get this up here.
So you talk about a little bit about the depth that you have on this year's team, because you seem to have the luxury where you don't have to force 5-stars to go out there, especially the last 2 years, but you can let them develop. So can you just talk about what you've been able to do in that department?
Yeah, no, I think that, we're fortunate. I think that's what the good programs historically have done over time. I remember a time, we were at Alabama, and I think it was 2016, and obviously I was an analyst on the offense, and I looked over there, and I was looking at Quinnen Williams and Roquan Davis as the 2 interior defensive linemen on scout team, and I was looking at Trayvon Diggs at corner on the scout team, and I'm sure there was other guys. I just remember those guys in particular, like, wow, those guys are really elite players, and they're down here getting work. And so we weren't that way here for a few years, and we've gotten to this point now to where, That's the developmental piece. And then that's the maturity piece for those players to know, hey, I may be on the scout team, but I'm actually getting quality reps because I'm going up against somebody so good. If I'm a young tackle, I got to block Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, Ethan Burke every day. Well, surely if I work at my craft, I'm going to get better over time. And it goes both ways, right? And so, there's a lot of luxury in that. It helps us to where as an offense and a defense, man, you're performing against really quality people, and it's not just knock them over or throw it over their head every time. You're getting more competitive looks, and I think ultimately that benefits the team as much as it benefits the individuals.
That depth that you were talking about a little while ago, is the art of building that any different now than it was 5-10 years ago, considering the new rules with the portal and everything?
Say it one more time. I just want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Is it any different trying to construct a roster with the depth that you want than it was 5-10 years ago because players are free to move if they're not starting?
I would probably say yes and no. Yes, in the effect of we got to understand the rules, right? That the portal, one, can be a detriment to your own team because players can leave and you think you have really good depth at a position, and the very next year it could look not so good because 3 guys leave. But the portal can be an asset because I get to go in the portal and replace positions of need. All the while, the traditional model of recruiting really well and developing players in your program still remains true. And so I think there's a bit of a balancing act that, hey, I'm not saying we're perfect, but we've done a pretty good job of managing so far. Again, we're every year is different. Some years you take more transfers, other years you don't. But a lot of that is predicated on, did you have more attrition on your roster of guys leaving and transferring, or guys leaving early for the NFL, so on and so forth. And you have 23 guys go to the NFL the last 2 years, a decent number of those underclassmen. You have to replace those positions. And then you have a couple transfers out of there now. Okay, is it fair to a high school kid to say you need to come here and you have to start because if you don't, we're screwed? Or maybe is it better to take a junior who can transfer in, and then you get 2 of those guys and you can still develop the freshman and count on the junior? But there's challenges to that too, because like I said, when you take in a transfer, a senior, a junior, they've been in another program for 3 or 4 years and they've developed habits in that program. And I'm not saying that we're a unicorn in the way that we operate, but I do think that we are unique in a sense of how we compete, the way we work, the connectivity on our roster and our locker room, and getting them accustomed to that, of what that looks like on a consistent basis is a different challenge than we've probably had to deal with in the past. Because normally the freshmen come in and it's like, this is how we do it, and you get in line and you start working on it, and then you work your way up. Well, now you're starting to bring a guy in, man, we've got to focus on this guy. We've got to get him ready quicker than probably a freshman normally would be.
So, Jason, when you hear that, first of all, I found it really interesting that I've had this thesis as relates to Texas looking like Bama. And the first thing that Sark went to when he asked the question was Bama, right? It was just, I'm like, yes, I'm not smoking that wacky weed. Like I know that I was onto something, and it just, that's what it reminds me of outside of the success, right? For all these years, Jason, and look, we saw it, Jason, in the first year or so of Sark, Ajay Hall, right? He went to Bama, but he didn't really become anything, right? I think Ben Davis was another guy who was a 5-star, right? Was that tight end a 5-star as well, or no? Jaleel Billingsley, was he a tight end?
No, he was pretty highly rated. I don't think he was a 5-star, but he was pretty highly rated, yeah.
But for years, Jason, 5-star kids would go to Alabama and they just sit. And you wouldn't hear from them until and I'm not saying everyone, but there were guys that you just didn't hear from for the first couple of years. That's what it reminds me of, Jason. It's almost to that point where, like, you remember, you tell us about the recruiting stuff of what you remember, that hey, yeah, Nick Saban, he would have a boatload of talent, and all these guys going to the NFL, but it's not like you show up and all of a sudden you're going to play.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those 5-stars were just bad evaluations or bad rankings too. I mean, we saw when Texas brought them in here, they I think the coaches were hoping, hey, that 5-star talent is still in there somewhere. But yeah, that's what Alabama. I always said Alabama and Ohio State. Now Georgia's certainly in that conversation and maybe the king of that conversation the last 5 years or so. But Alabama and Ohio State, they didn't just stack. It wasn't like they've got to get a number 1 ranked class with all these 5-stars and then maybe have 1 or 2, pretty good classes and then another 5-star class with a bunch of 5-stars. They were constantly every single year bringing in 5-star talent, bringing in elite talent. So when you bring in that kind of stuff, I mean, someone in the chat said, hey, I mean, they're not all going to pan out. They're all not going to play immediately, but the hit rate on those guys is going to be pretty high. The cream is going to have to rise to the crop. So that's what Texas is doing. They're not doing it. We'll see some programs, A&M this year is doing whatever they're doing to have a tremendous recruiting class, and it's going to have some high-level talent in it. But can they do it year after year after year after year? That's what foundations of championship-level programs are built on. That's what Texas is doing. Yes, you now have to supplement it with some portal additions, like Sark said, when certain guys leave or certain positions are a little thinner, you can supplement those positions with some guys from the portal. But to me, and I'll go to my grave saying this, the foundation, if you want to be a consistent championship contender, it comes from recruiting out of the high school levels, and it comes from recruiting elite players, and a lot of them year after year after year. It can't be 2 years out of 4 you do it. It has to be every single year. That's how you become what Ohio State has become. That's what Georgia is now. That's what Alabama's been for a long time. And even though Saban's gone, they're still recruiting at a high level. I still expect them to be that way. That's what Texas is turning into and becoming. And, I thought it was interesting, like Sark said, at practice, he mentioned, like you said, Alabama days. I mean, think about the practices here at Texas. A lot of times they'll divide it up into 2 different groups. They can basically have 2 practices going on. Well, in years past, that second group was guys that were never really going to be impact players. Now you look down there, you're like, holy crap, there's our starters over on this side of the field. Here's our third team maybe over here. And there's some really good players on that third team that are going to be NFL players someday, right? Working on the other side of the field. So, it is true, and it is interesting. Maybe that's why when I go to practice sometimes, or I said a couple of times we got to go, and I'm like, we can only go on certain parts of the field, and I'm trying to get pictures of every player, and I'm like, well, I can't, because those other guys who are really good players, the Justice Terrys of the world that I want to get pictures of, they're way down there on the other side of the field, and we don't always get to see them. But that doesn't mean there aren't really good players running down there on the scout side.
Jason, let's talk about the buy-in that needs to occur for this to happen, right? In order to get the buy-in, players have to believe there's going to be a payoff, right? Because there's no way I'm coming in as a 5-star that, everybody loves me. I had TVs out probably for my announcement. Like, everybody just was, throwing rose petals at me like it was Coming to America, and people were standing and barking like a dog and all this kind of things for me. Now I get here and I'm just like one of the guys. And in order to get the 5-stars to buy into, you have to sit and wait your time. There has to be what honest conversations that they're having, but they have to believe that the staff knows what they're doing in order to say, you know what, I'll take a secondary role here at Texas, correct?
For a short, it's like, Sark mentioned, it's kind of a juggling act with the portal, because they have to buy in, they have to be patient, but some guys aren't able to do that, right? And you mentioned, you commented on one of them earlier, that they think they should be playing from day one. And if they're not, they get unhappy, and then they might ultimately end up in the portal. But, I think when you're coming to a program, the number 1 program in the country right now, a program that's played in back-to-back college football semifinal appearances, you can accept it a little bit. If you're a 5-star guy and you're like, hold on, I'm not walking in from day one as a starter. Okay, well, this is a really good program. I'm wait a second. I'm a quarterback that the Kansas City Chiefs drafted, and I'm not starting from day one. What the hell? It's okay. You've got really good players in front of you. But it does take some patience. And I'm sure from these guys' perspective, it takes a little bit of swallowing some pride because they're not used to that. Man, these guys probably, as freshmen in high school, were probably starting varsity and really good players on varsity as freshmen. Most of them were. So they come to Texas, and dude, everybody's good at Texas. Okay, they got good players all over the place, and I've always said that when you get to a place like Texas, especially now, the way Sark has built this roster, but when these players come to a place like Texas, everybody's good. It's going to come down to who's going to work hard, who's going to focus. You can't just go through the motions. In high school, some of these players were good enough just to go through the motions. They were the best athlete on the field. Okay, and it didn't matter. They were going to play. They were going to be the best player. Well, that doesn't work in college, certainly not at a place like Texas. So, it does take some patience. I'm sure it takes some swallowing of some pride. But, I think Texas has shown, Omar, you mentioned it, the developmental side. Sark mentioned all the draft picks. Dude, just be patient with us. We're going to develop you. It might not be from the second you walk on campus, but, stick with us and we'll get you to where you want to be. And so far we haven't seen not a bunch. We've seen, one or two high profile guys transfer, but for the most part, guys have stuck it out here in Austin, and most of them, they've turned out to be really good football players, and they've been really happy with their careers at Texas.
Last thing, Jason. So Texas has Diabell, Tyler Atkinson, Jermaine Bishop. Those are 5 stars that are committed in the 2026 class. Is there someone else that I'm missing that might be on another publication?
Richie Wesley is a 5-star, I think, on some services. Derek Cooper is, I know at least one. So they've got 4 or 5. Yeah. So
I want you, next time you circle back to those guys, Jason, I want you to ask them, like, hey, if you come to Texas and you don't start right away as a freshman, you okay with that? Because, it's interesting. Like a guy like Diabell will come in next year, but look, if Arch is here, which we expect him to be, like Dia, you're just sitting. Like, it's like you're just going to have to sit there and wait and compete against KJ Lacey another year from now. Trey Owens, if he hangs around, like we'll see what happens. And but it just looks like that stuff is cool, and it's almost like, Jason, soak it up while you're in high school, because there's that cliche of, all these coaches have said this for years, but most of it's BS for most programs, which is as soon as you get here, your star ranking doesn't matter. That's what they say, right? But it all depends on what program we're talking about, right? It not for every program. As soon as you get here, the star ranking does matter, especially in this era of NIL, because you can't be the program that's forking over a bunch of cash for a 5-star.
Felix Ojo's star ranking matters at Texas Tech, right?
It matters.
Hey, Texas Tech was screaming from the mountaintop that Micah Hudson's the first 5-star we ever signed. So, it matters at some programs.
Right. It does. And there is that pressure to get some guys on the field. But it does seem like at Texas, to a certain degree, as with some of the bigger programs, yes, it matters. But just because you're Brandon Baker and you're a 5-star, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to beat out Trevor Gooseby for that backup left tackle spot, right? It seems like almost here it matters, and it may get you in the door, but it doesn't necessarily get you on the field.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the current commits at 2026 class. Diabell's not going to play. I mean, highly unlikely. I think Dia's probably perfectly fine with that. Tyler Atkinson's going to play. I mean, he's a great player. It's a position of need, right? I can't imagine Tyler Atkinson not playing. But we probably would have said the same thing about Justice Terry last year, right? When he signed in December. Then they go up and add players in the portal, and it's a different story. Richie Wesley's coming in as an edge, or he can even be a strong side defensive end. There's a lot of talent in front of him, so that one will be interesting. I think Richie Wesley plays just because I think that dude is a certified badass on where I think Richie Wesley plays, even though there's really good players in front of him. Derek Cooper, assuming he sticks with his commitment, Texas is bringing him into play. They're not bringing him in with the ideas of sitting as in redshirting next year. So I think Derek Cooper plays. Jermaine Bishop might need a little seasoning. I mean, he's still, first off, is it going to be offense? Is it going to be defense? He's about 160 pounds. He might need to put on some weight. He might play on special teams and things, but they can afford to bring some of these guys along slowly. But I do think of the guys they have in this 2026 class, probably, 3 out of 5 or whatever will play and play early. But I probably would have said the same thing from last year's group. Look at the conversation we're having.
That's exactly. You took the words out of my mouth, Jason. I'll let you go with this. I would have said the same thing about Justice Terry, Lance Jackson, because I would say, man, Justice Terry. I mean, look, hell, they don't have enough depth in there, and, at the defensive tackle position, and you see what happened there, right? And I would have said the same exact thing about all these other guys. And then there it is.
And now we're doing this show today, right?
Exactly. All right, Jason, get out of here, brother. Hey, you got anything cooking on Orange Bloods that we need to know about real quick?
Posted my 3-2-1 last night, actually, so that's up there. It's got some a couple updates on Texas commits who are solid. It's got an update on one who we need to keep an eye on. I've got flip candidates in there, so it's some interesting stuff. Some talk about moving my daughter to college and love her to death, but what a pain in the ass it is moving a girl to college versus moving a boy to college. So you're lucky, Amar. You got 2 boys, and so count your blessings, man. So,
well, yeah, and neither one of them seem like they're interested in college. So
they're young. Your boys are young; they'll get there. So
yeah, they'll get there. Oh, wait, real quick.
Yeah,
what's the quick difference between moving the boy and the girl to college? I'm kind of curious.
Quick version: my son drives a little Hyundai sedan. He got everything when we moved him into his apartment and his dorm, for that matter, but into the trunk of his car, because it was a furnished apartment. He didn't need a bed. He didn't need a couch. Everything was in the trunk of his little car. My daughter, we just moved her into her first apartment. She was in a dorm last year, and it was a 1-bedroom. A furnished apartment with her and her girlfriends, and the bed of my truck was full. Like it was over the edge of the bed on where I had to strap stuff down.
Oh my God, you're that guy I see on the interstate that has me freaked out.
No, I'm a good job, but I kept it all strapped down. Yeah, the cab of my truck was full. My daughter's hatchback, the seats were folded down. It was full. And my daughter's not a high maintenance girl. She's not a girly girl. She has baseball posters. She's not a big clothes shopper. But it's just amazing the amount of shit that these girls accumulate compared to boys. So my son's like, you don't even need my help moving in. And I just went down there more to see his apartment. My daughter, it's like, all right, we had a bunch of crap to carry in, but it was all small stuff. But it's amazing how much of it she accumulates. And by the way, now I've got to take her a couple other things. I'll be driving back down there this weekend for a quick day trip to take more crap to her. So,
sounds like when you go traveling with your wife, or in my case, my woman, and trying to convince her for a weekend trip to just pack a carry-on.
Yes.
And she's like, a carry-on? I can't do a carry-on for a week. I'm like, how's this not possible?
Dude, when my son was really young, like kindergarten, first grade, he and I used to go camping a lot. We'd go up to Lake Georgetown, just take a tent. And I mean, it would be very minimal. I mean, I could fit everything in my back seat, not even the bed of my truck. One time we invited my wife and daughters, and we had to take my truck and my wife's car full to the brim with shit. I'm like, we're going camping for one night. How much stuff do we really need here, right?
Yes.
A tent, a pillow, a cooler, boom, I'm good. But yeah.
Well, but just by the way, Jason, Tex Blonde, her daughter goes to Texas State as well.
Yeah.
So at some point, you'll have to connect them, or you guys can carpool down there to visit with your wife, of course. I won't get you in trouble. Sorry, Jason. All right, get out of here, Jason.
All right, later, guys.
Jason Sugarmel, orangebuds.com. Appreciate him and his insight. So go ahead in the chat. I had to put this back down. What do you think? You think Texas is becoming that new Alabama as far as when you start looking at the 5 stars that they accumulate, the talent that they accumulate, and they're saying to themselves, hey, that's great, but you got to wait your turn. What do you think about that? Put that in the chat. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Over 80,000 strong, and we're going to keep that party moving and keep that party going. So go ahead and subscribe if you have not done so. I'll be back tomorrow. Got more shows that's coming on today. Remember what I always say, live each day like it was your last, because one day it will be. So go out, do something absolutely special for yourself. You enjoy it, even if that means treating yourself to a lunch, a candle, a snack at a 7-Eleven, whatever it is. Do something nice for yourself, because y'all deserve it. Y'all be care. Texas, Ohio State, it is coming up soon. I'm absolutely pumped about that. We got more things.